Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you not this time from my little nutshell of infinite space, but elsewhere, actually Lake Tahoe. With me today, I have a really special, terrific, and highly brilliant guest. He is a columnist, a journalist, and a political commentator, former editor of the New Republic, and he's currently the editor at large for Jewish Currents. His op-eds appear regularly in the New York Times. And if he looks familiar to you, you may have seen him sharing his thoughts on his Substack page or on MSNBC. His latest book, which I read and I just finished, is called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. It's my good fortune to have him here with me today from his perch on the aisle that is Manhattan. Welcome, Peter Beinart. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks. Glad to be with you.
Good. I read the book, and as a fellow landsman, I've been dealing with, the reckoning that you described. And I'll just start with this. When I was a kid, I remember Israel as the gutty little underdog standing up against all those meanie Arab nations. And my mother was a baby refugee from Germany, having been born in Berlin. And, I was very invested as a Valley Reformed Jewish kid in the Israeli project. My joke was, if I wanted a tree in Israel, no fucking problem with all the Hadassah and the Ort and the charities and the whole thing. I got most of my relatives under 6 feet of earth in Valhalla in Westchester County. There wasn't a luncheon that they didn't attend, but it seems different today. And I'm feeling you've experienced some of that yourself.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for many of us to hold, I think, two truths together. One of which is that for many Jews, not all Jews, but for many Jews, the experience of the creation of a Jewish state coming right after the Shoah, the destruction of two-thirds of European Jewry, not just the creation of a state, but the creation of a state in a place that is absolutely central to Judaism itself, that Jews are just naturally habituated to think about and to long for in a certain sense. It suffuses all of our religious texts and our holidays, was experienced as a miraculous event, right? Kind of. And it's understandable that many Jews felt that way. But it was also the case that there was another group of people who were there, and that the creation of the state of Israel required their mass expulsion. To create a Jewish state in which you have a large Jewish majority and Jews were running things, there were simply too many Palestinians around. They were living on too much of the land for that to be possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that beginning, you have these dual realities. And this process of expulsion that began in 1948 and has continued, and of oppression, especially of Israel, since it in 1967 took these territories, the West Bank and Gaza, where Palestinians live under Israeli control but don't have citizenship or the right to vote. This is a very brutal oppression. It leads to violent, to often terrible violence in response,
Mm-hmm.
most horrifically on October 7th. And then in response to that, you have even more horrifying violence by Israel. And so we have to, in my book, in some ways, is about how we can hold these two stories, caring about ourselves as Jews, our safety, but also recognizing, this is kind of my core point, that I believe that the safety of Jews and the safety of Palestinians is interconnected. So we're not going to get safety at Palestinians' expense. That the long-term path to our safety, which we yearn for, which we deserve, is also safety and freedom for Palestinians too.
So, what was at once a political miracle for Israel in 1948, as you say, coming after the Holocaust, and was a political tragedy for the Palestinians?
Yes, and we need to try. One of my favorite lines from Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah, the oldest part of the Talmud, is it says, "Who is wise? The one who learns from all people." Right. So one of the things I think is really important for Jews is many of us understand what Israel means in a certain kind of Jewish stories. As you say, since we were kids, we've been hearing that. But it's really important to try to walk a few blocks in the shoes of Palestinians who are thinking, okay, what would happen to European Jewry was horrible, right? Most Palestinians would say that without any prompting. But it wasn't us. We
Right.
didn't do it. We're sitting here. We were colonized by the British. We're looking forward to having independence, like all these other peoples around the world who were colonized by various colonizers. And we didn't, it's not our fault. We shouldn't be the ones who have to pay, right, for the things that Germans and Poles and Lithuanians, Ukrainians did to Jews. But we pay the price, which is that the European Jews come and take our homes and make us refugees, right? And so I think we have to, oftentimes in the Jewish discourse, there's a way of treating Palestinians as pathological, as kind of like just like they're naturally anti-Semitic or they're naturally violent and hateful, as opposed to understanding why the world would look very different from their experience than it might look to many Jews.
You know, when you say that, I'm reminded of, I'm old enough to remember when Israel's real existential enemy was, Egypt. And
Right.
they had fought wars, as you know, 48, 56, 67, 73. And you'd have these discussions. You cannot make a deal with the animals. You cannot make a deal with the animals. It's not possible. You cannot. Well, they did.
Yes.
And it still held. And they made it with a leader who had a history of being a terrorist, meaning Menachem Begin. And so just my thinking is like, it's fantasy thinking inhabits both sides. So the Palestinian people say the river to the sea, they ain't going anywhere. The Israelis aren't going anywhere. And alternatively, the Orthodox want the Judea and the Samaria and the biblical Israel. And it's this, that's fantasy thinking too. Nobody's going anywhere. So figure it fucking out. They did it with the Egyptians. Why can't they do it now?
Well, I think the question is, on what terms are people going to live together? Now, one idea is the idea of partition, right? You're going to have an Israel, but then the West Bank and the Gaza and East Jerusalem would be a Palestinian state. Now, I think one of the problems with that, one of the challenges is that Israel has built more and more settlements in the West Bank. This is the land on which the Palestinians can build their state. Palestinians will say something like, listen, okay, we were going to divide the pizza, but you've been eating our slices of the pizza, so we have fewer and fewer slices, right? And so I think almost anyone would have to admit that the prospects of a viable, contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank, it's much harder than it was, 20 or 30 years ago. Another vision is the idea of everyone living equally in one state, right? Which I'm quite sympathetic to. It means that people don't have to leave their homes. If Jews want to live in the West Bank because it's biblically precious to them, they should be able to live there, just living equally alongside their Palestinian neighbors. But that would mean that it wouldn't be a Jewish state. It would mean that it would try to be a state more like the state that some of us want in America, a state that treats everybody equally under the law, irrespective of their religion, their ethnicity. And while I believe that Israeli Jews could be safe in such a circumstance, because I believe that when people are treated equally, it ultimately makes things more peaceful. As you know, I don't need to tell you, most Israeli Jews and many American Jews would find that prospect terrifying. They would be like, we can't be safe without a Jewish state, without the IDF there. There is a third answer. And I think we have to acknowledge that it is there on the table, and it frightens me a lot, which is what I would call the American solution. And what I mean by the American solution is what was America's solution in the 19th century to its native population. We didn't create a two-state solution along the Mississippi River. We've cleaned you out of here, and now you can have everything west of Mississippi. You can have California, you can have Colorado.
Going to Lakota.
Yeah, that's right. That wasn't the answer. Nor did we what happened was that the United States, over a process of decades, basically destroyed the native population. Not every last person, but destroyed it to such a state there couldn't really be political and military resistance.
Right.
And that was many countries were formed that way. And if you look at the Trump plan, which is to basically move all the Palestinians out of Gaza, and you look at the number of Palestinians who are being forced out of their homes in the West Bank, there is, in a way, a slow-moving process that looks a little bit like that. And so that is another alternative, that there are people, Benjamin Netanyahu said he supports the Trump plan. So these are the different alternatives. And one has to think in terms of what is one's basic values, moral values, and then ultimately one also has to think about what keeps people safe. And to me, I believe that the destruction of a people violates fundamentally my belief that Judaism insists on that all human beings are created equal in the image of God, and that's why. And I believe ultimately that the vision of equality is the best one.
So, being a person from the chosen tribe, a chosen people, doesn't mean you're chosen because you're superior or you're special. It maybe has another meaning. Maybe you're chosen to follow a higher standard. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that the notion that I think it's very, very important. I think to when you think about a very dangerous concept like chosenness, right, which draws a line between Jews and other people in the world, and is to assert that we are no better, we are no fundamentally different than any other group of people, right?
Mhm.
What I think our texts say, well, at least I think that the interpretation that makes most sense to me is we have a particular way of interacting with God. Other human beings have other ways of interacting with God. And our particular way means that we have been chosen to have to follow certain rules, right? So if you look at Jewish texts, say that all human beings are governed by what are called the seven Noahide laws. You can't kill, you can't steal. But not everybody is supposed to not eat milk and meat together, right? Or to not turn on their cell phone on Shabbat. Those are our particular rules. Those are the particular way that we connect to God, and we are chosen to have to live up to that set of particular rules, and other people may have their own rules. And that, I think, is the way of thinking about chosenness that doesn't slide into supremacy, which I think is really important.
My joke is, I would say to a girl, "Well, hey, if God chose me, I don't see why you can't."
How did that work out for you? Did that go over with?
I'm a member of a cult. It's called Jews for Gentile Girls.
Interesting,
When my
interesting.
grandparents came to this country, they converted from Judaism to capitalism, and I can tell you they've been extremely observant ever since. What can I say? It's been a pretty seamless transition.
Oh my goodness. Uh-huh.
I've really enjoyed the book. I want to just say right off,
Okay.
it was a gutsy book because
Mm.
I'm sure it did not come without personal consequences for you amongst your friends and your own communities. I have a lot of Jewish friends, including within my own family, that they can't face the criminality of
Mm.
really what's going on there. I saw a great movie last night. It's called The Four Feathers, and it's a little bit like a precursor to Lawrence of Arabia. And what you see is this clash between nationalism and tribalism.
Mm.
And tribalism is one of the scourges, in my view, of the 20th century. And
Mm.
I feel like we as Jewish people are falling victim to my tribe, right or wrong. And
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I worry about that a lot too. I mean, I think that we it is understandable, it is laudable that we have a sense of obligation to one another. That many Jews, like myself, were raised to think about Jews as a kind of imagined family, right? That Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, right? That we kind of, and there is lots in Jewish tradition. There's a famous line, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze LaZeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. But I think we have to distinguish that we have to balance that against the notion that we also have a tradition which says that all human beings are created equal in the image of God, and they are all infinitely valuable. And we have to remember that obligation to one another doesn't mean blind loyalty to a state. States are self-interested actors, and they can protect people, they can also destroy people, right? And they always have to be subject to criticism, whether it's our own country, Israel, any other country, right? And so it just doesn't make sense to say that in order to be in solidarity with Jews, you have to support what Israel is doing, or even Israel's basic political ideology. Would someone say that in order to care about Chinese people, you have to support the government in Beijing, or to care about Black people, you have to support the government of Nigeria or Zambia or Kenya? It doesn't make sense. These states have to be subject to criticism. And my worry is that in a lot of Jewish communities, the state is put on this pedestal, right? Literally, you walk into a synagogue, you see it on the bima, the Israeli flag, and it's like, no, we worship, we the center of Judaism is Torah, right? Israel is a state created by human beings, which must be subject to criticism by human beings, including us.
Which comes full circle to, I think, a point you made in your book, that this sort of worship that you're describing is a form of idolatry,
Right.
as you describe it. I'm more paraphrasing.
Yes.
Which in its essence is at the core of Jewish belief. Like, we don't do idols.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, I mean, I study, I study Talmud, and the particular tractate that I'm studying now, which is the tractate called Avodah Zarah, is entirely about Avodah Zarah. Could be translated as idolatry. The entire tractate of the Talmud about basically how terrible idolatry is and how much you must do everything in your possible power to avoid it. Right, and we think of idolatry as this, I don't know, like, bowing to some like statue or something, but really idolatry is the worship of something that's human made, right? And in some way, and so a state is made by human beings, right? And so you can support a state. You can say, on balance, I think there should be a Jewish state of Israel. That's a position you can take, but it must be able to be subject to criticism. And what I worry about often in the Jewish community is that there is a kind of worship of the state, which is to say, whatever Israeli leaders say Israel is doing at the moment must be right, even if what they're saying now contradicts what they were saying a while ago, right? And so you see the American Jewish leadership. It's like when the Israeli government said it supported a Palestinian state, the line in the American Jewish community is like, we support a Palestinian state, but the darn Palestinians, they won't accept one. And then when Netanyahu comes in, he's like, I don't support a Palestinian state. The line switches, and it's like, of course we don't support a Palestinian state. It's way too dangerous. Like, no, you have to have it you have to think for yourself, and you have to be able to have an independent perspective in which you can subject this state to criticism. It reminds me sometimes of the way I see some people in America dealing with Donald Trump. Exactly. It's like, Donald Trump is great because he's going to build the wall. Oh, he didn't build the wall. Screw the wall. We don't need the wall. Like, whatever Trump says, all of a sudden you basically bow down, right? And that seems to me, that's very, very dangerous.
Well, I always thought if he ever finishes that wall, what I want to know is, how the hell am I going to get out? Like, that's my concern. I want to get out, and I don't care about people coming in. Yeah. And I'm in LA, and our city is under assault. It's like crystal knocked in La La Land is what's going on. It's saying, you're talking about idolatry, and my feeling about idolatry is, I wasn't sure why those ancient Hebrews gave them up, other than that they're really heavy. And if you got a split, it's like, what about the sun god and the ocean god? And that's no, just take the fucking book, the Torah, the thing, and we're out of here. I thought that was the reason, because we could travel light.
Absolutely. No. I mean, George Steiner famously said that the Torah is the Jews' portable homeland, right? And right. I mean, not just idolatry, but there was a temple in Jerusalem, which Judaism built around animal sacrifice, and that's not portable, right? But the value of a set of texts is that they can be read and reinterpreted around the world. And so, yes, that's part of, I think, the power of Judaism and other monotheistic religions, is that they're not bound to a certain place and time, that there's something more broad and more universal about them.
Right. And a lot of those, they threw out their backs. There was a lot of herniated discs. There's just a lot of issues that people aren't talking about. Today we forget how heavy they were, So I don't want to get off this subject, but it's thrown a cleaver, as you say, through the Jewish community and largely conscience, and I'll tell you a story, I come from very reform, but I'm often asked, like, Bill, could you lead the friggin' Passover? And I said, well, yeah, this is a really interesting story. It feels like it's the first liberation story in all of literature. Is there one that precedes it? I'm not sure. And it's nonviolent, essentially. Well, I mean, God intervenes and throws in the ocean, and
yeah, and the destruction of the Egyptians in the Yam Suf. But other than that, it's not violent.
Yeah, but Israel, they weren't. It wasn't like we killed and rose up. I think you talked about something in Purim where it was actually half of the story is a Jewish revenge narrative that isn't talked about. And I'm curious for you, because I know you've had some change of heart over your career,
Yeah.
about the nature of and efficacy of violence, state
Yeah.
violence,
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah.
Did a lot of reading about Gandhi and
Yeah.
some of our
Yeah.
avatars here. Your
Yeah. Well, I would, I think we should all work towards a world of nonviolence, right, in which conflicts are solved peacefully. And I think that Judaism, like perhaps other religions, has a messianic vision, the kind of from the prophet Isaiah and others, that people will turn their swords into plowshares, even that the lion will lie down with the lamb. I think Woody Allen said, the lion will lie down with the lamb, but the lamb won't get a good night's sleep or something.
Yeah.
He was skeptical. But there's a vision, right? I think in the here and now, that's not attainable in this time, right? And so, we in a domestic place, we have police who carry guns, right? We empower them to carry guns. We hope that they'll use those justly, and we have militaries. What I think you need is rules around that, right? So you need rules around the use of violence to try to limit it and to ensure that whether it's the violence inside a state, or the violence outside of a state between states, that it is always a last resort, and it only and it is and there are also rules about how it's used, right? This is part of what's so horrifying about Trump and the use of ICE, right? Is that, like, it's not that we don't think that there should be any immigration enforcement, or we don't think there should be any police or any federal agents, but they have to be bound by the law, right? And similarly, if you're fighting a war, God forbid, under international law, there are rules about the treatment of civilians. You can't shut off food and water to an entire population, as Israel did for months earlier this year, right? There are rules of war. And I think that is, we would have a long way to go just to get to that place, right? And I think that would be a much better world. And that, I think, is the kind of vision of law surrounding violence and force that I would hope we could move towards.
Now, speaking of violence and force, in the last, I mean, it's such a dynamic environment. Things are changing, but I mean, I guess Hamas is not destroyed, but they're not weaker. They're not stronger than they were on October 7th.
Yeah.
They've been shattered.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
folks in Lebanon, Hezbollah
Yeah.
people are,
Yeah.
this isn't their high water mark.
Yeah.
Assad
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Gone.
And he's going back to optometry. I'm not sure where he's.
Yes, in Russia of all
He's
places.
seeing patients.
I'm sure he's got a great practice now.
Yeah, he's seeing patients, and
right. They're like, "How long have you been doing this?"
yeah, just technology's changed.
Right, now that's a mid-career change.
Yeah, and of course, our Farsi friends in Iran. I don't know where they are with the nuclear bomb,
Yeah.
but they're not stronger.
Right.
Is there a new opportunity here?
Well, I think the problem is, Israel is far more militarily powerful and technologically sophisticated than these other places, right? And so it can beat the hell out of them militarily and run circles around them, as it has been doing, right? But you're not addressing the fundamental political problems, right? So let's take Hamas. Israel's killed huge numbers of Hamas fighters and leaders. It's destroyed huge amounts of weapons, right? But when you kill all these people, right, including a lot of civilians, then some of those people are going to want to fight you, right? Because they've seen you killed their father or you killed their brother, right? So it seems like what's happening in Gaza now is that Israel's not fighting. The people that Israel's fighting now are not the people who committed October 7th. Many of those people are dead. It's new people, right, who are fighting because they want revenge and because they see Israel rampaging around their area, right? And Israel's destroyed a lot of the weapons, but the weapons they seem to be using, Israel's also dropped an unbelievable amount of weaponry, bombs and other stuff, and a lot of that stuff doesn't explode, right?
Comes back, yeah.
So what are they doing? They're taking that. This is what they did. The Taliban did this. Is what they did in Iraq. It's what they did in Vietnam. It's an old story, right? So you think you're winning, right? Just like America thought it was winning in Vietnam, because the body count is now up to 74,000 Viet Cong we've killed, but there are another 74,000 you just created or more, right? So this is, I think, the fundamental problem in Gaza and in different ways also in these other areas, right? Like, are you dealing with the root of people's grievances, which is fundamentally political, right? And I think that's why I worry that Israel is not making itself safer, even though it has committed, even though it is acted in these very aggressive military ways.
The core political grievance has not been addressed. It's been
Mhm.
exacerbated, in my view, over the last few decades.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid in 1965, they had what is commonly referred to as the Watts riots, which I didn't think was a fair word because it sort of infers that, the black people, it was the summer and they just
Right. Right.
spontaneously combust.
Right. Right.
They just blow up. You can't help it. As if the
Right.
decades of police
Yes.
brutality and housing restrictions and all
Right.
the
Right.
injustices that were heaped upon them were
Right.
just
Right.
out of
Right.
nowhere. And I feel
Right.
like, at
Yes.
least in Jewish and in American, maybe even liberal democratic political thinking, that's still there. It's just like October 7th. I'm not here to defend it. It's a nightmare, but
Absolutely.
it didn't come
Absolutely.
from friggin' nowhere.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you mentioned the quote unquote Watts riots and the other riots that continued in the United States in '65 and '66 and '67.
Right,
Because what Martin Luther King said, Martin Luther King was devoted his life to nonviolence, right?
right.
Martin Luther King said, you can't understand these violent eruptions that are happening in Black areas in America's cities without understanding the structure of violence that Black people are experiencing. And if you don't want these violent eruptions, you have to deal with that structure of violence. And that was not an apology or a rationalization or justification for violent actions. We know that King profoundly opposed those things, dedicated his life to opposing those things. So we should be able to say that the targeting and killing of civilians on October 7th, murder, kidnapping, sexual violence, is fundamentally wrong, right? Period. But we should also be able to say, if you are not willing to have a conversation about the context, about the structure of violence that Palestinians lived under, then what you're essentially saying is they're just barbarians. They're savages. Like saying they do this for fun. And then the lesson of that is, well, we just need to kill them, basically.
Right.
And the truth is, most of the people in Gaza are from families of refugees that were expelled from Israel in 1948. You can't understand Gaza without understanding that. Many of them can see the lands from which their parents or grandparents were expelled. They've been living inside a blockade since 2007 that Human Rights Watch calls an open-air prison. The UN said Gaza was unlivable before October 7th. My friend Mohammed Shahada, and if anyone's listening, I'd really encourage people to look at his work. He grew up in Gaza. He said that everybody he knew growing up in Gaza contemplated suicide, even though it's a very grave sin in Islam. People would get older and older and they wouldn't even wish each other happy birthday because they had no prospect for a better life. Even if they got 3 degrees and they were the top of their class, they didn't have the prospect for any decent job. There wasn't enough water. There wasn't enough electricity. And so these are not decent conditions of life. This is a suffocating, plus they're being bombed periodically by Israel. Now that is not to excuse Hamas, but it's to say, if you want Palestinians to behave in a different way than October 7th, and Palestinians to produce different political movements other than Hamas, you have to offer them a vision of freedom, right? In which there's a prospect of them having a decent life. And Israel has not, especially since Netanyahu has come into power in 2009, Israel has not been doing that, which I think endangers everybody.
So Zionism, can it include Palestinian equality?
Depends what we mean by Zionism. I think it
Right.
depends by Zionism, right? So I think if Zionism means a Jewish state, then I would say no, because I think a Jewish state is inherently unequal. Just like we would probably be, someone came along and said, listen, America's going to be a Christian and democratic state, but don't worry, Bill and Peter, you're going to be totally equal. We're just going to put a cross on the flag.
Yeah.
We're only going to allow Christians to immigrate here. And most of the land is going to be controlled by a Christian organization, which is kind of the way public land works in Israel, but you'll be fine. We'd be like, not so sure, right? So in that sense, no. And that's why I don't believe in Jewish states, Christian states, Muslim states, Hindu states. If one thinks about Zionism the way some people did before 1948, which is it meant a thriving Jewish culture, a thriving Jewish society, people speaking Hebrew, people living there, doing a kind of Jewish cultural production that you can only do there, that is harder, that you can't exactly do in LA or New York, because you're living on that precious land and you're speaking Hebrew, then I think it can exist. Then I think it can. So it depends what we mean by Zionism.
Right. Well, I know some of the current leaders are have Nobel Peace Prize
Mhm.
envy big time.
Yes, yeah,
I
yeah.
saw the letter that was handed across the
I know.
desk.
I
And it
know.
was like Mussolini nominating Hitler or Bonnie nominating Clyde.
I know. The funny thing is, why doesn't Trump just create his own Trump prize,
Right.
right? And give it to himself. He can give it to himself every day. Like, why does he need this, you know?
Yeah. And Netanyahu was talking about the freedom to choose
Yeah.
to leave.
Yes, that's right. Nice freedom you got there. Right. It's like, I've come into your house. Good news. You have the freedom to leave.
In
Like,
5 minutes.
yeah, thanks a lot. After I've just wrecked the house, right?
Yeah.
It's unlivable, right? Like, yeah, thanks a lot. And you can go to South Sudan. It's not like it's not that they're offering them Monaco.
Right. I know. And by the way, some of those offerings are being made in Los Angeles now. I'm even afraid as a comedian, if I speak too much, someone will knock on my door and say, guess what? You just want a free trip to El Salvador or Sudan
I
or
know.
what's the alligator Alcatraz. You pick one.
Alligator Alcatraz. I know. Lovely stuff.
Right. Constitution out the window. Um, I'm trying to find like, what is the hopeful alternative? And you know, it does feel, I mean, I think, like, I'm not here to interpret Netanyahu. I don't know him. I think he's motivated by somewhere deep in his soul about what happened to his brother at the airport, many decades ago. But I think these guys all want to be remembered historically as somewhat heroic.
Mhm.
And I think there's a chance, but what do I know? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Netanyahu, like most politicians, wants to stay in power, you know? And he's also living in an environment, I think is partly what Trump has done and other people have done, in which the rules about what you can do to stay in power have become, let's say, more plastic, right?
right,
And so that the and you can you and so he's doing all kinds of kind of Trump-like things, basically screw around with the political and judicial process in order to stay in power. I think Trump has always also had two heroes. One of them is Winston Churchill, and the other is the revisionist Zionist leader Vladimir Jabotinsky. And what kind of they're both famous for among their acolytes is that they saw Hitler coming before other people did. They saw the threat. And so I think that's the template for Netanyahu, is that basically, like, it's 1938, right? He talks about that with Iran all the time, but also with the Palestinians and others. And I think that template, I think, is very, very problematic for this particular situation, right? Israel is not the equivalent. Israel, because it basically means that the only thing you can do with the Nazis, right, is to fight like hell and try to destroy them before they destroy you, right? And when you just and it precludes the possibility of actually coming to some kind of political or diplomatic agreement with people based on the fact that they have legitimate concerns, right?
right,
Israel is afraid of Iran. The Iranians are also pretty afraid of Israel, right? Because Israel has been beating the hell out of them now year after year after year, right? And even the
right,
people who hate the regime are afraid of Israel because Israel just bombed them, right? And they've been subject to economic sanctions. So you have to be able to see people as human beings. And if you see them just as the reincarnation of Nazis, you're not really seeing them as human beings.
right. And actually, what's ironic is Israel's had ancient ties with a stable Jewish population going back generations in Iran or Persia. As a point of information,
Yeah.
my family is in the radio station business here in Los Angeles, and we own and operate KIRN, Iran, which is the only Farsi station
Interesting.
in America, as far as I know. And there's Jews and Muslims working there, and they all worship
Yeah.
the same God. It's money and and advertisers. They found common ground. The good news is nobody in my family understands Farsi, so whatever they're saying, we have no clue. Uh, so,
Yeah.
I don't want to berate this, but
Yeah.
Peter,
Yeah.
I want to say this. First of all, I've been living in your Substack world and your
Thank you.
Instagram posts, and you're catching up on your op-eds and Jewish Currents and the New York Times, and you're just full throttle out there at the point of the spear of reckoning and truth. Um, and I'm sure it doesn't come without some risk and loss of relationships for you personally.
Well, I have a tremendous amount of privilege, And I think a lot of us, as you were reckoning, I've been thinking more about that in America today, right? Like, I have a passport. I'm an American citizen. I was born here. I'm also, a white guy who lives on the Upper West Side of New York. I'm a tenured professor. There are a lot of people whose lives are a lot more dangerous than me, and who would be, if they said the kind of things that I'm saying, they might pay more of a price than me. And part of the reason one reason I feel like I should do these things is I have that security and privilege that some other people don't have. And there are people, there are people who don't like it, and they let me know. And some of them are in my family, my extended family, or others. There are people in my religious community, and so sometimes it's hard because I want to be liked, like other people. I want people to think I'm a nice guy, and so it's kind of always hard when you see people who don't like you, don't think you're a nice guy. But I've also had a lot of really beautiful interactions and relationships that have been formed by this. I think one of the things that's been most important for me is that I didn't grow up knowing Palestinians. Right? We talked about Palestinians. I didn't know them, and I know lots and lots of Palestinians, lots and lots of Palestinians, and it is very powerful to me to see that we come from different places. Our family stories are different, but I hear from Palestinians again and again and again and again and again things along the lines of, this is ultimately not a struggle about us versus you, one tribe against another. It's about basically how people should treat one another, right? And that we share basic common values. And so I wouldn't trade that. Like, that's very precious to me. And also a lot of younger American Jews, because there are a lot of younger American Jews who, like you, are very alienated. They're like, I can't believe this. Like, I can't believe this is being done in my name. Like, I can't believe that I can't talk to my parents about it. I can't talk to my rabbi about it. Like, and I feel like I also get to see how much energy and passion there is among younger American Jews who I think want a more moral American Jewish community. And so that really energizes me. And I feel actually like super, super grateful to be able to do work that I feel like has purpose.
Well, my own experience is I play jazz. So every Thursday I'm down in the hood playing with all my black friends, and it's the happiest, richest
Right.
night of my life.
Right.
And I always feel I'm going to go integrate yourself. And it sounds like you've had a very powerful experience integrating yourself across boundaries that, people don't normally cross, and you're richer for it. And I'm just going to think about this. Frederick Douglass had this famous speech in like the 1850s, the July 4th speech. It should be right up there with the Lincoln second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address. He didn't edit it. It was very long. He could have shortened it, but that's a little after the fact. But the point that when I read it, it was like the white people, the slavers, would be liberated too.
100%.
From the abolition. And 100%. I feel like the Israelis are shackled in this thing, generation after generation of Israeli kids having to patrol streets and carry guns. Is that freedom for them?
No, you're so right. I mean, there were just a bunch of Israeli soldiers killed, just the other day. And it's not just killed, what the Israeli kids do. And these are kids like, these are young kids. They go serve in the military, and then they go to like Kathmandu for a year, right? Or they go to South America. And partly what they're doing, I think, is trying to escape from what they've seen and what they've done, right? I mean, it's not good to send 19-year-old kids to go and be occupiers of another population, having to have life and death power over men, women, and children, sitting there in the baking sun at a checkpoint, or God forbid, going house to house in Gaza and blowing things up and killing people. It destroys. And so, yes, I really believe this is one of the points that Martin Luther King made and James Baldwin made about white Americans. He said, you need to be liberated from supremacy, just like we need to be liberated from inferiority, And I think that's my hope, that you and I will live long enough to see that happen in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, a lot of those Israeli kids come to LA and become surfers, and they take my waves at Malibu. So there's all kinds of
you're suffering. You're suffering too.
I'm paying a very high price. You stole my wave. So Peter Beinart, I feel like I made hopefully a new friend, because
absolutely,
I'm a big time admirer. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
dropping in and doing the hang on my little pod, A Rebel Without Applause. I'm going to sign off and just stick with me on the other side to say an appropriate goodbye. Folks, thanks for hanging in. A couple notes. Read the book. Tell me the title again, your latest.
Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza.
A Reckoning. Check out Peter's Substack. He's really at the point of the spear, whether it's domestically, the Democratic Party, Judaism, the whole world, he's taking it on. Till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namashaloha. See you.